There are moments in life when heaven does not whisper, it declares. There are seasons when silence is not absence, it is preparation. And there are souls who are not merely living days, but walking through divine assignments written before their first breath. Today, this message reaches such a soul. You who have been overlooked, but never abandoned. You who have been pressed, but not destroyed. You who have walked through fire and wondered why the flames did not consume you. Hear this deeply. You were not spared by accident. You were preserved by purpose. There is a sealing upon your life not visible to the natural eye, but undeniable in the realm of destiny. A marking, not of man's approval, but of divine appointment. And what has been sealed by heaven cannot be erased by earth. The storms that tried to break you were not random. They were revelations in disguise revealing what you carry. Because pressure does not come to destroy the chosen one, it comes to activate what is already within. And now, the season shifts. This is not the time of waiting anymore. This is the time of activation. Your final assignment is not a punishment, it is a commissioning. It is the moment when, here, everything you survived becomes everything you now serve with. What once wounded you will now instruct others. What once broke you will now build others. What once silenced you will now speak through you with authority. Do not mistake the heaviness you feel for defeat. It is responsibility awakening inside you. Heaven does not assign lightly, and those who are chosen are never called into comfort, they are called into impact. Even now, there is a shaking in the spirit of your old identity. What cannot go with you into your assignment is falling away. People, patterns, fears, and doubts that once held you are losing their grip, not because you fought harder, but because your season has changed. You are being aligned, and alignment often feels like isolation before it feels like elevation. But hear this clearly. You are not alone in the assignment. You are accompanied by grace that does not fail. Every step you take now carries weight. Every word you speak carries authority. Every decision you make echoes beyond what you can see. Because when heaven seals a life, even the unseen begins to respond. So rise not in arrogance, but in awareness. Not in fear, but in obedience. Number T in hesitation, but in readiness. Because the chosen one does not wait for perfect conditions. The chosen one creates impact in imperfect conditions. This is your moment. Not to become something new, but to finally walk as what you were always meant to be. The seal is upon you. The assignment is active. And heaven is watching your yes. Go forward not as one hoping to be chosen, but as one who already is. You were not randomly placed into this world, and nothing about your beginning was a mistake. Before your first breath touched the atmosphere of earth, there was already a distinction placed upon your spirit, a separation that could not be seen by human eyes, but was fully recognized in the realm where destinies are written. This is not separation caused by rejection, nor isolation caused by abandonment, but a sealing that marks ownership, purpose, and divine intention. It is the kind of separation that does not announce itself loudly in the beginning, but slowly becomes undeniable as life unfolds. There were moments in your early journey when you could not understand why you felt different, why certain places never truly fit you, why certain connections never fully held you, and why even in crowds you could feel unseen yet deeply aware. It was not confusion, it was design. The seal upon your life created a boundary between what was temporary and what was eternal in assignment. You were being preserved while others were being positioned. You were being protected while others were being promoted into roles that were not yours to carry. The separation was not punishment. It was preparation through preservation. There are things that would have broken you if you were not set apart. There are environments that would have diluted your identity if you were fully absorbed into them. There are voices that would have redefined you away from your original assignment if you had stayed too long. So heaven created distance, not to isolate you from life, but to insulate you for purpose. Even the loneliness you felt carried intelligence. It was not empty space, it was protected space. In that space, unseen shaping was happening. While others were learning through exposure, you were being formed through concealment. While others were gathering applause, you were gathering depth. While others were being celebrated externally, you were being strengthened internally. And this is where the mystery of the sealed one begins to unfold. Because being sealed does not always feel powerful at first. It often feels like delay. It feels like unanswered questions. It feels like doors that open for others, but hesitate for you. It feels like being close enough to see opportunities, but not always being embraced by them immediately. Yet what you could not see in those moments was that delay was not denial, it was divine protection over timing. There is a timing attached to sealed assignments that cannot be rushed by pressure or forced by comparison. The sealed one must mature into alignment, not chase alignment through imitation. And so even when you tried to figure out why your path looked slower, deeper forces were ensuring that when your moment arrives, you will not collapse under it. The seal upon your life also guarded your identity from premature exposure. Not everyone can see what you carry early, because not everyone has the capacity to interpret it correctly. Some would have named it too soon, mislabeled it, reduced it, or redirected it into something smaller than its true scope. So concealment became protection, and silence became strategy. Why? You were hidden not because you were insignificant, but because you were significant enough to require covering. And in that covering, something extraordinary was happening beneath the surface. Your discernment was sharpening without your awareness. Your resilience was being built without your permission. Your spiritual sensitivity was increasing through experiences that did not make sense at the time, but now form the foundation of your understanding. Even your disappointments were not wasted. They were filters removing what could not travel with you into your assignment. There is a mark upon you that makes ordinary paths feel incomplete, not because you are better, but because you are assigned. And assignment always creates internal tension until alignment is reached. That tension you sometimes feel is not instability, it is the pressure of purpose pushing you toward expression. The seal of separation also means you were never meant to fully blend into environments that are not designed for your activation. You can be present, but not absorbed. You can observe, but not belong in identity. You can pass through, but not settle permanently where your assignment is not recognized. His is why certain transitions in your life felt forced or uncomfortable. They were not your final dwelling places, only passages. And even now, as you reflect on your journey, there is a deeper awareness beginning to surface. The pieces that did not make sense are starting to align internally. The closed doors are beginning to reveal wisdom. The detours are beginning to show direction. And what once felt like confusion is slowly revealing itself as orchestration. The seal is not only protection, it is preparation for recognition, because there is a moment coming where what has been hidden will become evident, not through noise, but through function. The sealed one does not need to announce arrival, the assignment itself announces the carrier. Life begins to respond differently when you step into what you were preserved for. Situations begin to align without struggle. Connections begin to form without forcing. Opportunities begin to recognize what has always been present but previously unseen. Yet before that outward manifestation, there is always an inward breaking of old limitations. The identity formed through survival must be surrendered so the identity formed through assignment can emerge. And this process often feels like shedding layers of old understanding, releasing familiar definitions, letting go of past interpretations of self that no longer fit what is being revealed. The seal ensures that even in transformation, you are not lost. Even in transition, you are not abandoned. Even in unlearning, you are not disconnected from purpose. Every step is monitored by a deeper intelligence guiding the unfolding. There is also a quiet authority forming within you through all that you have endured. Not authority that is loud or forced, but authority that carries weight because it has been tested in silence. The kind of authority that does not need validation because it has already survived contradiction. the kind that does not depend on recognition because it has already been refined in obscurity. This authority is part of the seal, and now, something within the atmosphere of your life begins to shift subtly. You may not be able to define it clearly yet, but you can sense that what used to delay you is beginning to lose its grip. What used to confuse you is beginning to lose its power. What used to hold you in cycles is beginning to loosen its hold. Number T, because everything has changed externally, but because something within you has been marked for transition into a different level of responsibility, and as this internal shift continues, there is a growing awareness that you are not becoming someone new, but becoming someone revealed. The sealed one does not transform into a stranger, they are unveiled into recognition. What was always inside begins to match what begins to manifest outwardly in ways that cannot be fully controlled or predicted or explained by prior understanding, and in that unfolding awareness, you begin to sense that the separation was never about distance from life itself, but distance from distortion, distance from misalignment, distance from anything that could have interrupted the purity of what was placed within you before your journey began. The seal remains, not as confinement, but as confirmation of something still unfolding beneath layers of timing and preparation and unseen orchestration that continues to move even now, beyond what words can fully capture or complete. The fire did not come to destroy what heaven had chosen. It came to refine what could not survive destiny in its unprocessed form. There is a kind of preparation that cannot be achieved through comfort, and there is a depth that cannot be formed through ease. So the chosen one often discovers that life begins to press in ways that feel heavier than expected, not because something is wrong, but because something is being proven within. There were seasons when everything familiar started to lose its stability at once. What once felt secure began to shake. What once felt predictable began to shift. What once gave reassurance began to withdraw its comfort. And in that process, it may have felt like things were falling apart, but in truth, they were being stripped away. The fire of preparation does not ask permission before it begins its work. It arrives quietly in circumstances, in delays, in disappointments, in unexpected closures, and in moments that force reflection deeper than comfort allows. It is in these seasons that the chosen one begins to question the silence. Why certain prayers seemed unanswered. Why certain efforts did not produce expected results. Why doors that seemed almost open suddenly closed without explanation. But what could not be seen at that time is that not every delay is resistance. Some delay is a protection from premature exposure to assignments that require maturity, endurance, and internal stability before external expression becomes sustainable. The fire does not just test strength, it reveals structure. It shows what is built on emotion and what is built on substance. It exposes what was borrowed from others and what was formed through personal revelation. And in this exposure, there is discomfort, because truth has a way of removing illusions that once provided temporary confidence. But even this discomfort carries purpose, because nothing unstable can carry what is eternal in assignment. There were moments when isolation felt intensified during this process. People may have drifted away, conversations may have reduced, connections may have felt distant or inconsistent, and it may have seemed like support systems were weakening. But what was actually happening was refinement of dependence. The fire was teaching reliance that cannot be anchored in external validation, because the assignment ahead requires clarity that does not collapse under absence of approval. Even the internal thoughts began to shift during this time. Old patterns of thinking were challenged. Objections surfaced more often, not to destroy faith, but to strengthen its foundation. Because faith that is never tested remains theoretical, but faith that survives fire becomes unshakable in movement. The chosen one does not remain the same after such seasons, because something deep within begins to harden into resilience, not hardness of heart, but stability of spirit. There were nights where the weight felt heavier than explanation, moments where silence felt louder than answers, situations where direction felt unclear despite sincere effort to understand. But even in those moments, unseen formation was taking place. Character was being built where recognition could not reach. Endurance was being shaped where applause could not interfere. And humility was being embedded where pride could have easily grown in more comfortable conditions. The fire of preparation also removes false timelines. It breaks the assumption that everything must happen quickly or visibly. It introduces a deeper understanding that timing is not controlled by urgency, but by alignment. And alignment requires internal readiness, not just external desire. So what looked like delay was actually calibration. What looked like absence was actually concealment. What looked like denial was actually refinement of capacity. There were lessons that only fire could teach, lessons about patience that is not passive but active, lessons about strength that is not loud but consistent, lessons about identity that does not depend on environment, lessons about purpose that does not fluctuate with emotion. And through these lessons, something begins to settle within the chosen one, a quiet understanding that not everything needs to make sense immediately to still be meaningful in unfolding. The fire also separates noise from truth. It reduces dependency on external interpretation. It begins to clarify inner voice versus external influence. Because the assignment ahead requires discernment that is not easily swayed by opinion. So in this season, confusion is not always confusion. Sometimes it is transition between two levels of understanding, where old perception is dissolving and new perception has not yet fully stabilized. And even though the process can feel intense, there is a strange evidence of preservation within it. Despite pressure, there is survival. Despite weight, there is endurance. Despite loss, there is continuation. Despite uncertainty, there is movement forward that cannot be fully explained by logic alone. This is because the fire is not operating without oversight. It is functioning within boundaries set by purpose, ensuring that nothing essential is destroyed. Only everything unnecessary is removed. The chosen one begins to realize slowly that certain things they thought they needed were never part of the assignment. Certain desires begin to lose urgency. Certain attachments begin to loosen naturally. Not through force, but through internal realignment. The fire does not only test, it releases. It creates space by consuming what cannot transition into the next level of calling, and in that space, awareness begins to grow. Awareness of strength that was not recognized before. Awareness of endurance that was previously underestimated. Awareness of inner stability forming beneath emotional fluctuations. Awareness that survival itself was evidence of preservation beyond natural explanation. There is also a deep shaping of identity happening through contradiction, where what was expected did not occur, yet progress still continued in unseen ways. Where what was hoped for did not arrive, yet something stronger was being built in its place. Where what was planned shifted, yet purpose remained intact beneath all adjustments. And through this contradiction, trust is restructured not around outcomes, but around process. The fire continues until dependence on appearance is broken, until confidence is no longer based on immediate results, until identity is no longer tied to visible confirmation. And when that breaking reaches a certain depth, something within begins to stabilize in a way that cannot be easily shaken again by external unpredictability. Even now, traces of that fire remain within memory, not as trauma alone, but as evidence of formation. Because what was survived becomes part of authority. What was endured becomes part of wisdom. What was overcome becomes part of the foundation. And nothing experienced in preparation is ever wasted in the context of assignment. There is still movement happening within this process, still layers unfolding, still understanding forming beneath surface awareness, still alignment progressing quietly beyond what can be immediately articulated, still transformation continuing in dimensions that have not yet fully revealed themselves into visible expression. There is a hidden dimension of destiny that does not announce itself through movement, but through stillness, that stretches beyond explanation. It is the season where life appears paused, yet something deeper is continuously unfolding beneath what the natural eye can register. This is the silence where the chosen one is not forgotten, but concealed within the intentional covering of divine strategy. It is not inactivity, it is invisible activity, where shaping happens beyond observation and formation continues beyond awareness in this silence. External validation begins to fade in importance, not because it never mattered, but because it no longer holds authority over identity. The absence of noise becomes uncomfortable at first, because the human mind often equates silence with abandonment. Yet in this hidden season, silence is not abandonment but shielding. It is a protective covering over a process that would be interrupted if too many voices had access to its unfolding. There were moments when it felt like nothing was happening, when prayers seemed to echo into stillness without immediate response, when effort appeared to produce no vision. Sybil shift, when questions multiplied, but answers did not arrive in the expected form. But what could not be seen was that silence was performing surgery on perception. It was removing dependency on immediate feedback. It was breaking attachment to constant reassurance. It was teaching awareness of presence that does not rely on confirmation. The chosen one begins to discover that silence has layers. On the surface, it feels like waiting, but beneath it, restructuring is occurring. Old interpretations of life begin to dissolve. Assumptions about timing begin to loosen. Expectations shaped by comparison begin to weaken. And slowly, a new internal framework begins to form, one that is less reactive to external conditions and more anchored in unseen alignment. During this season, even relationships may feel distant, not necessarily through conflict, but through shifting resonance. Conversations may become less frequent or less aligned with inner transformation. Connections that once felt central may begin to feel peripheral, not because they were wrong, but because they were not designed to carry the weight of what is being formed in this hidden place. The silence creates separation, not to isolate in loneliness, but to refine in focus. There is also a deep recalibration of desire happening in this silence. Things that once felt urgent begin to lose intensity. Aspirations are not erased, but purified. Ambition is not removed, but redirected. The motivation shifts from external recognition to internal conviction.
Ow.
And in that shift, something stabilizes within the spirit that no longer depends on applause to validate direction. Silence also exposes inner noise. Thoughts that were previously ignored begin to surface more clearly. Doubts become more audible. Fears become more identifiable. Questions that were suppressed begin to rise into awareness. But this exposure is not meant to overwhelm, it is meant to cleanse. Because what is not acknowledged cannot be transformed, and silence creates the space where internal truth is no longer hidden beneath distraction. There were moments when waiting felt like delay, but what was actually occurring was alignment beyond perception. Because alignment often requires invisibility before visibility. What is being positioned cannot always be revealed while positioning is still in progress. And so silence becomes the environment. Where unseen arrangements take shape, where timing is adjusted beyond human scheduling, where coordination occurs between events that have not yet intersected in visible reality. In this hidden season, the chosen one also begins to develop sensitivity that was previously dormant. Awareness deepens. Discernment sharpens. Perception becomes less dependent on appearance and more attuned to essence. There is an increasing ability to recognize what is genuine and what is temporary, what is aligned and what is misaligned, what is part of assignment and what is simply passing through experience. Silence becomes a teacher that does not speak in words but in realization. It teaches patience that is not passive but observant. It teaches strength that does not demand recognition but remains steady regardless of recognition. It teaches endurance that does not fluctuate based on immediate reward but persists through internal conviction that something greater is unfolding beyond present visibility. There is also a hidden healing occurring within this silence. Places within the inner world that were previously occupied by unresolved emotion begin to settle, not through avoidance, but through growth, a dual integration. Memories that once triggered strong reactions begin to lose intensity. Experiences that once felt heavy begin to shift into understanding rather than burden. And through this process, emotional clarity begins to emerge without force. Even the perception of time begins to change in this season. Days may feel slower, not because time has changed, but because awareness has expanded. The mind begins to notice layers that were previously overlooked. The spirit begins to register subtle transitions that were previously unnoticed. And in this expanded awareness, silence no longer feels empty but structured with unseen activity. There is a quiet stripping happening within this space, not of identity, but of illusion. What was once believed about limitation begins to be questioned. What was once accepted as permanent begins to be reconsidered. What was once assumed about capacity begins to be expanded internally. And through this stripping, a deeper version of self begins to surface, one that is less influenced by external narrative and more grounded in intrinsic assignment. Silence also reveals endurance that was previously unmeasured, because in the absence of distracting, the ability to remain steady becomes more visible internally. The chosen one begins to realize that survival through hidden seasons is itself evidence of preparation. That remaining intact through unseen processes is not accidental but intentional. That continuing forward without external reinforcement is a form of strength that cannot be easily replicated, and even though clarity may not be complete yet, there is a subtle awareness growing that this silence is not indefinite. It is directional. It is moving towards something, even if that destination is not yet fully revealed. The stillness carries motion beneath its surface. The quiet carries instruction beneath its depth. The delay carries orchestration beneath its appearance. In this unfolding awareness, the chosen one begins to sense that nothing experienced in silence has been wasted. Every unseen moment has contributed to internal architecture. Every unanswered question has contributed to deeper seeking. Every hidden day has contributed to unseen strengthening. And even now, something continues to shift beneath the surface of what can be named or fully described, continuing to align without announcement, continuing to prep, without visibility, continuing to form without interruption. There comes a moment in the journey of the chosen one when the hidden preparation begins to meet visible movement, not as a sudden explosion, but as a gradual shift that changes the direction of life from within. This is the season where alignment begins to override confusion, where scattered pieces start forming a pattern that was never random, and where what once felt disconnected starts revealing a higher coordination that was present all along. In this shift, life begins to rearrange itself in ways that cannot be fully controlled by effort alone. Doors that were once resistant begin to respond differently. Conversations begin to carry unexpected direction. Opportunities begin to surface in places that were previously overlooked. And even delays begin to reveal themselves as protection rather than obstruction. It is not that everything becomes easy, but that everything begins to make sense in a deeper way than before. There is a quiet but undeniable sense that movement is happening beyond what can be physically tracked. Decisions begin to carry weight they did not previously hold. Choices begin to feel less random and more guided. Even inner impressions become more precise, as if something within is being tuned to recognize timing in a way that is not based on logic alone, but on alignment with purpose. During this phase, what once felt like waiting begins to transform into positioning. The same stillness that once felt like delay now begins to feel like preparation for placement. The chosen one begins to realize that nothing was stagnant, only rearranging. And what felt like lack of progress was actually recalibration of direction towards something more specific than originally understood. There is also a growing awareness that certain cycles are beginning to close. Patterns that repeated for years start losing their influence. Situations that once felt cyclical begin to break their repetition. responses that once came automatically begin to shift. And in these subtle changes, something deeper is being realigned within the internal framework of life. This alignment does not always feel comfortable at first. It can feel unfamiliar because it disrupts what was once known. It challenges internal expectations. It requires release of control over outcomes that were previously assumed. And in that release, there is both vulnerability and transition. But within that discomfort, there is also confirmation that something is being guided beyond human limitation. The chosen one begins to notice that resistance is no longer as effective as it once was. What used to block progress begins to lose influence. What used to delay movement begins to dissolve under persistence that is no longer fueled by emotion alone, but by deeper conviction. It becomes clear that effort is no longer operating in isolation, but in partnership with timing that cannot be manipulated. There is also a refinement of relationships during this season. Some connections naturally shift closer, while others naturally drift into distance, not necessarily through conflict, but through misalignment of direction. It becomes clearer who is part of transition and who is part of assignment. And this clarity is not always immediate, but gradually revealed through experience rather than assumption at the same time. Internal clarity begins to sharpen. Decisions that once felt complicated begin to simplify. Confusion that once clouded judgment begins to lift. And in its place, a quieter but stronger form of knowing begins to emerge. Not loud certainty, but stable recognition that does not need constant external confirmation to remain steady. There is a deeper sensitivity developing in this alignment. The chosen one begins to feel shifts before they fully manifest. Awareness becomes more attuned to subtle indicators. Intuition becomes more reliable in ways that were not previously recognized, and perception begins to operate beyond surface-level interpretation, moving into deeper recognition of timing and direction. Even challenges begin to transform in meaning during this phase. They are no longer interpreted purely as obstacles, but as indicators of adjustment. Where resistance appears, there is now inquiry instead of panic. What is this shaping? What is this revealing? What is being redirected? And through this perspective, even difficulty begins to carry instruction rather than confusion alone. There is also a noticeable reduction in unnecessary weight. Emotional attachments that once consumed attention begin to loosen. Concerns that once dominated thought begin to lose intensity. And priorities begin to reorganize themselves naturally. This is not forced detachment, but organic realignment that appends when internal direction becomes clearer than external influence. In this season, patience is no longer passive waiting but active trust in unfolding process. The chosen one begins to understand that timing is not delayed but layered. What is meant to happen is not absent, only structured in sequence that requires certain foundations to be established first. And so patience becomes cooperation rather than endurance alone. There is also a strengthening of identity during this alignment. Not identity based on external roles or recognition, but identity rooted in internal awareness of purpose. The chosen one begins to recognize that value is not defined by visibility, but by assignment, and assignment carries its own authority, regardless of immediate recognition. As this alignment deepens, clarity begins to extend into direction. What once felt broad begins to narrow into focus. What once felt uncertain begins to gain structure. And what once felt like multiple possibilities begins to converge into specific pathways that were always embedded within the larger design of life. There is also a quiet restoration of confidence, not the kind that depends on outcomes, but the kind that emerges from internal consistency through changing circumstances. Confidence begins to grow from survival through unknowns, from endurance through shifts, from persistence through uncertainty. And this confidence is quieter but more stable than anything previously experienced. Even silence begins to feel different in this season. It no longer feels like absence, but like preparation before movement. It carries expectancy without anxiety. It carries anticipation without confusion. It carries awareness that something is forming even when it is not yet visible in full. Expression: the chosen one also begins to notice that inner resistance is decreasing. Where there was once struggle between doubt and belief, there is now gradual settling into trust that does not require full understanding, not blind acceptance, but grounded awareness that not everything needs to be fully seen to still be accurately guided. There is a deeper sense that life is no longer random in its unfolding. Even disruptions begin to appear coordinated when viewed from a broader perspective. Even unexpected changes begin to reveal alignment when observed over time. And in this realization, perception shifts from segmented interpretation to connected understanding. As alignment continues, there is also an increasing sense of readiness forming internally. Not rushed readiness, but matured readiness shaped by experience, reflection, endurance, and unseen preparation. It becomes less about external qualification and more about internal confirmation that something has been formed sufficiently to begin expression in a new way. And even now, as this shift continues, there remains a deeper unfolding still in progress beneath what can be fully articulated, where movement is happening in layers that continue to align quietly with direction that is not yet fully visible, but increasingly undeniable in its progression. There is a point in the journey of the chosen one where everything that was once internal begins to meet the threshold of expression, where preparation is no longer hidden in silence, but begins to move into visible responsibility. This is not a sudden arrival, but a culmination of every unseen season, every silent lesson, every fire endured, every delay survived, and every alignment that has been quietly forming beneath the surface of awareness. What once felt like waiting now reveals its Alpha's readiness that was being shaped beyond recognition. The weight that was once carried in confusion now begins to feel different, not lighter in absence, but clearer in purpose. Because what is being activated is not just a moment, but a mandate that carries continuity beyond a single experience. In this activation, the chosen one begins to realize that nothing endured was wasted. Every hidden season contributed structure. Every pressure contributed resilience. Every silence contributed discernment. Every separation contributed clarity. And now all of it converges into a state of awareness where life is no longer interpreted as scattered events, but as a unified preparation leading into responsibility that cannot be avoided or ignored. There is a shift in how decisions begin to feel. They are no longer merely personal choices, but directional alignments. Every step carries implication beyond immediate consequence. Every action begins to feel connected to something larger than individual preference. And in this realization, responsibility becomes not burden, but recognition of assignment. Finally becoming active in motion, the chosen one begins to notice that influence is no longer theoretical. Words begin to carry weight they did not previously hold. Presence begins to affect environments in subtle but undeniable ways. Interactions begin to shift in tone, as if something within is being recognized even when not fully understood by others. This is the beginning of activation where identity and assignment begin to overlap. In visible expression, there is also a deep internal settling that begins to occur. Where once there was anticipation mixed with uncertainty, there is now a quieter certainty that does not depend on full explanation. It is not absence of questions, but presence of alignment that holds even in incomplete understanding. And in this stability, movement becomes less about striving and more about responding to what is already unfolding in this phase. Timing becomes more sensitive. Delays are no longer interpreted through frustration alone, but through awareness that sequencing is still in motion. Openings are no longer chased in desperation, but recognized when they emerge. And closure is no longer resisted as loss, but understood as redirection towards something more precise within the assignment. There is also a refinement of perception that deepens in this activation. The chosen one begins to distinguish between what is temporary and what is foundational, between what is distraction and what is instruction, between what is emotional reaction and what is directional truth. And through this refinement, clarity becomes less about information and more about recognition of alignment. Even identity begins to shift in this phase. Not in becoming someone different, but in finally expressing what was always embedded within. There is a release of hesitation that once limited expression. There is a quiet surrender of fear that once restricted movement. And in its place, a grounded awareness that presence itself carries authority. When aligned with assignment, there is also a noticeable change in how resistance is experienced. Challenges no longer feel like obstacles to stop progress, but indicators of refinement within progress. Pressure is no longer interpreted as punishment, but as confirmation that movement is occurring at a level that requires strengthening. And through this shift in interpretation, endurance becomes more strategic than emotional relationships, and environments also begin to respond differently in this active action. Some connections deepen in alignment, while others naturally dissolve without force, not through conflict, but through divergence of direction. It becomes clearer that not everything is meant to transition into the same level of assignment, and clarity replaces confusion about separation. There is a growing awareness that visibility is no longer the goal. Impact becomes more significant than recognition. Substance becomes more important than appearance. And authenticity becomes more essential than approval. This shift redefines motivation from external validation to internal alignment with purpose that cannot be fully measured by immediate response. Even uncertainty begins to lose its power in this stage, not because everything becomes known, but because trust in the unfolding process becomes stronger than need for immediate clarity. The chosen one begins to move with awareness that not everything needs to be fully understood before it can be faithfully followed. And in that trust, movement becomes more fluid and less restricted by hesitation. There is also a deep sense of continuity forming between past preparation and present activation. What once felt disconnected now reveals itself as layered progression. Nothing stands alone anymore. Every experience connects to the next in a chain of preparation that leads into function. And in this realization, life begins to feel less fragmented and more intentionally structured. In this activation, inner authority begins to stabilize. Not authority imposed externally, but authority recognized internally through endurance, insight, and alignment. It is not loud, but it is steady. It does not need to prove itself, but it becomes evident through consistency in movement and clarity in direction. There is also an increased sensitivity to timing in this stage. Knowing when to act becomes as important as knowing what to do. Knowing when to remain still becomes as valuable as knowing when to move. And this awareness creates a rhythm that is less reactive and more responsive to unfolding direction that is not always immediately visible but consistently felt. Even challenges that arise in this phase begin to feel different in nature. They no longer disrupt identity, but refine execution. They no longer destabilize awareness, but sharpen discernment. And through them, the chosen one becomes more precise in understanding what strengthens alignment and what weakens it. There is a quiet but undeniable sense that life is no longer preparing the chosen one in the same way. Preparation is transitioning into application. Formation is transitioning into function. Learning is transitioning into expression. And silence is transitioning into responsibility that carries outward impact. And even now, within this activation, there is still unfolding happening beneath what can be fully seen, where alignment continues to deepen, timing continues to refine, and purpose continues to expand into dimensions that are not yet fully expressed, but already in motion beyond the limits of immediate perception.